This presentation is on the layering technique, also known as the three-tier technique, presented by Matthew Martin, Marshall Pearson, and Brian Yang. The layering technique, the main focus is separating components into layers. This separating of components makes change management very easy, as you need to change the software later on. The three layers are the presentation layer, the business logic layer, and the data access logic layer. The presentation layer is concerned with interacting directly with the user. These are your user interfaces. Your business logic layer is any of the logic that is concerned with the inputs given by the user, and your data access logic layer is concerned with saving and retrieving the data. It's very similar to the Model View Controller, or MVC, framework. The difference is in MVC, the communication can be in a triangle. All layers can communicate with each other. In the three-tier or layering technique, everything must go through the business logic layer, so the presentation and data access logic layers never communicate directly with each other. The upsides of the layering technique is that most developers are already familiar with this pattern, so therefore you can bring on developers pretty easy. It's an easy way, it's already organized, and so it's an easy, well-organized way to create an application. Again, the change management of future changes is simplified, which is the biggest plus. It allows the companies also to divide their developers by their skill sets. So your user interface developers would be on the presentation layer, your database developers would be on the data access, and so they can specialize in the different layers. The downside is there's a lot of code involved making the data pass through the different layers that may not really add any value. It is hard to deploy the application, particularly for larger application, because one small change to a component can require redeployment of the entire infrastructure. Also, layering does not lend itself well to high-performance applications due to the inefficiencies of having to go through different layers to get to a second layer. So the communication between all of the different layers is an advantage in the MVC framework versus the layering technique.
So the recommendations of the layering technique that we have is multi-layered approach is particularly good for web scaling, production grade, and cloud hosted applications. Very quick and relatively risk-free. One thing that comes to mind when we're talking about web scaling and all that kind of stuff would be WordPress. WordPress is one of those things, if you've ever dived in and started developing, it takes a lot of things to get one thing to work in WordPress. There's many components that you have to step through and do all this stuff to get stuff working. And that, in my mind, is definitely like a layering type of web scaling program. In WordPress, you can expand very, very big and very massive too, and you do a lot with WordPress. Now, the second recommendation is a system that you can split up into smaller applicational logic components that can be spread across multiple servers. Now, one thing that comes to mind on that one would be Oracle middleware. Oracle middleware has, you could set it up many different ways. One of the ways that I've seen it set up is it's got a server for each component. And so it's not just the components that you're programming, but also the components for the application server itself. So the application server itself is forcing you to program it in a certain way so that you have to follow suit. And one thing that's kind of, if you with booting these things up with these servers, if you don't boot them up in a certain order, each server requires a service, and if you don't boot it up in the right order of these services, then the application service for middleware will fail. So that's kind of why it's layering, because each one is built on top of the other, and if you don't have the right component there when it's booting and it's trying to register, hey, I found my component that I need to continue, then you're going to have to start from scratch again. So that's one of the kind of like a good example of this type of program. Now let's go into our demonstration. The demonstration, we chose to pick the calendar part of the app. So let's first start with breaking down the problem, separating into pieces. Let's see what we can do to make this problem easy, smaller portions. Then we want to, separate these, expand on these pieces, see what we can, what each piece will have, what each piece will do, etc. Then we want to check to see if there's anything else that we can move into other layers. Okay, so to continue on, we have this little like Visio diagram, and as you can see, you have the calendar activity at the top, which will be your presentation layer. That will be the thing that you actually will be seeing on your phone in the app. Then underneath that, it talks to the calendar class. Well, the calendar class is the logic of building your calendar. Finding, it will have some functions such as get day, get days of month, etc. And then the calendar class will talk to the event class, and the event class will talk to the calendar class, and the calendar class will say stuff like, hey, do I have an event on this day? And the event class, since it's responsible for saving and retrieving the events, it will let the calendar class know what's going on. Then right next to the event class, you have the notifications. So the notifications will be saved and retrieved by the notification class, and then also it would be fed up to the calendar activity as notifications, as things are triggered. Notifications are triggered and things of that nature. Now the meal class is one of those special things with layering. Layering helps you reuse your code. No code duplications. No, doing the same thing over and over again. So the meal class will actually be coming from the meal part of the application. That is going to be reused, and it's going to be wonderful because you don't have to do it again because you're reusing that portion of the program. To finish up with the demonstration, so just kind of going over, so the calendar activity would be the presentation layer. The calendar class would be the business logic. The event class and the notification class would be your data access logic layer, because they're going to be responsible for saving and retrieving the information that is needed, usually most likely by the calendar class. Now the meal class is something that we in this portion of the application don't need to go into because it's part of another part of the application. We're just reusing the code. So let's go through now to the sources. These are the sources that we found from our online searches, and we just want to thank you so much for paying attention. And